After my 99th confession was rejected by Jake, several bullet comments appeared before my eyes. Is the female side character stupid, rich and beautiful, but still being a swore this guy? Wake up. Jake loves the poor scholarship girl heroine. Keep forcing yourself on him and you'll end up bankrupt and in prison with nowhere to cry. I was scared to death and randomly handed my drink to a guy passing by. The bullet comments were shocked. Holy crap, how does the side character know he's the only big villain who can rival the male lead? The floating text scrolled faster than my heartbeat. I stood there on the edge of the basketball court with the afternoon sun cutting long shadows across the pavement, and for the first time in what felt like years of my own ridiculous story, something clicked into place with surgical precision. I had been the obstacle. The cautionary tale. The rich girl who couldn't take a hint, plastered across every chapter as the villain who made the real love story more dramatic by contrast. The bullet comments weren't insulting me, they were warning me. And unlike every other moment in my life where I had been too lovesick and too blind to read the room, I was reading it now, loud and clear, in glowing floating text only I could see. Lucas caught the drink I shoved at him without spilling a drop. He didn't ask why. He didn't look at me like I was unhinged, the way everyone else always did when Jessica Johnson did something unexpected. He just held the cup with one large hand, his expression as neutral as carved stone, and waited. That stillness was the most unsettling thing about him. Lucas Halle wasn't the brooding bad boy type that novels love to dress up in leather jackets and call misunderstood. He was genuinely dangerous in the way that mattered, quietly, legally, structurally dangerous, the kind of person who didn't threaten you. He simply made things happen, and by the time you noticed, it was already over. The bullet comments had called him the only one who could match the male lead in the future. Standing next to him, I believed it in my bones. I smiled at him. Sweet, deliberate, the kind of smile I had wasted for 3 years on a boy who looked through me like glass. Lucas's ear tips turned the faintest shade of red, and the bullet comments erupted so fast the text blurred. I didn't gloat. I filed it away. The meal happened. The private room was reclaimed. Jake was removed with the particular efficiency that money provides when wielded without apology. And by the time Lucas and I sat across from each other surrounded by sweet and sour pork ribs, he pretended not to want and absolutely devoured. I understood what the bullet comments had been trying to tell me from the beginning. This was not a consolation prize. This was a correction. The love letter disaster happened the next afternoon, and it felt, briefly, like the universe had decided to remind me that humiliation has a long memory. 99 pink envelopes pinned across the school bulletin board in neat, mocking rows. My handwriting, my words, my most embarrassing, breathless, deeply sincere confessions, mounted like a museum exhibit of poor decisions. Someone read the one dated the day before aloud, and the silence that followed was the particular silence of 300 people realizing simultaneously that they were watching something genuinely painful. I had written it, I had meant it when I wrote it. I was not going to pretend otherwise. What I was going to do was make absolutely certain that the person who broke into my locker understood that stealing from Jessica Johnson was the worst financial decision they would ever make. I held the letter up. I read one line aloud, self-deprecating and precise, just enough to pull the crowd's discomfort into something closer to reluctant laughter. Lucas removed the rest from the board one by one while blocking every camera that tried to capture the moment, and when Principal Harris arrived, I had already photographed my locker, retrieved my time-stamped family chat messages complaining about my own romantic crimes, and framed Imaya's brief, fractional expression of triumph so perfectly in the architecture of my complaint that she didn't even realize she had walked into it. The investigation was open before the bell rang. I went back to class. I did not cry. The bullet comments called it a clean sweep. I called it the beginning. What happened over the following 2 weeks was not revenge in the theatrical sense. I did not plot dramatically in a darkened room. I did not monologue. I made phone calls. I reviewed contracts. I asked my father, in the gentlest possible tone over Sunday breakfast, why the Johnson Group's annual scholarship fund had been rooting through a third-party academic foundation that had recently come under review from his... My father looked up from his newspaper with the expression of a man who had not been questioned by his daughter in a very long time. I told him I had been doing some reading. He told me I sounded like my grandmother, who had run the company's legal division for 14 years and never lost a case. I considered that the best compliment I had ever received. The scholarship fund, it turned ouchie, was the thread. Jake's scholarship, the one that had paid for his tuition, his books, his cafeteria meals, the quiet dignity he wore like armor while accepting my private room and my chef and my 3 years of humiliating devotion. That scholarship came from the Johnson Foundation. Not directly, it had been obscured through 3 administrative layers and a partnering institution, the kind of obscuring that happens not from malice but from the particular laziness of people who assume rich girls don't read audits. I read audits. I had been reading them for 2 weeks. cross-referencing fun disbursements, tracing the paper trail with the focused, sleepless intensity I had previously reserved for writing love letters. And what I found was not just irony, it was leverage. I did not use it immediately. That was the part the bullet comments didn't predict. They expected a dramatic confrontation, a cold boardroom reveal, something cinematic and immediate. What I did instead was wait. And while I waited, I let things continue to develop exactly as the story wanted them to. Jake and Emma grew closer. The school watched and approved. I was seen less and less in contexts that involved Jake, and more in contexts that involved quietly building something that had nothing to do with him at all. Lucas and I had lunch 3 more times. He never suggested it. I always did, and he always came, and his ear tips were always slightly red, and the bullet comments narrated it like a slow-burn drama they had waited years to watch. I let them enjoy it. I was enjoying it too, in a way that felt cleaner and more honest than anything I had felt in 3 years of chasing someone who looked at me like a problem to be managed. The moment came 6 weeks later, not at school, but at a Johnson Group charity gala my parents hosted every autumn in the glass-walled ballroom of the family's hotel. It was the kind of event where the right people noticed things, and the wrong people realized too late that they had been noticed. Jake came as Emma's guest. She had been nominated for a Young Academics Award that the Johnson Foundation. I had approved the nomination myself 2 weeks prior with a signed letter on official letterhead, because I believed in doing things correctly and completely. Jake saw my name on the letter at the registration table, and his expression did something complicated and involuntary that the bullet comments flagged with quiet satisfaction. I was not watching him. I was standing at the far end of the room with Lucas, who had arrived in a dark suit that fit him with the kind of precision that suggested someone in his life had very strong opinions about tailoring, and who had said exactly 4 words to me since arriving: "You look different tonight," in a tone so flat it somehow landed like a declaration. I had worn deep burgundy. I had worn it deliberately. The bullet comments had strong opinions about color symbolism, and I had decided, for once, to agree with them. We stood at the edge of the room and talked about the kind of things we had started to talk about in the private lunchroom. His quiet observations about people, my sharper ones, the way our silences had stopped feeling like gaps and started feeling like punctuation. He made me think faster. I made him talk more. It was, the bullet comments noted with great ceremony, a complementary dynamic. The confrontation, when it came, was initiated by Emma. She found me near the dessert table, voice low and controlled, wearing the expression I had catalogued and studied since the bulletin board incident, that soft, wounded face that was actually a weapon. She said she hoped there were no hard feelings. She said she understood I was going through something difficult. She said, with the particular cruelty of someone who knows exactly what they're doing, that she had always hoped Jake and I could part as friends, and that she genuinely wished me well. I listened to all of it. I set down my dessert fork. I said, simply and clearly, that I appreciated her kindness and that I had one small piece of news to share before the awards portion of the evening began. I told her that the Johnson Foundation had completed an internal audit of its scholarship disbursements, that several grants would be under review for reallocation, and that the academic partner institution currently under investigation had informed the foundation that they would be fully cooperating with the review board. I said it the way my grandmother would have said it, gently, completely. Emma's face did not change right away. That was the frightening part. She held the expression for 3 full seconds before something behind her eyes recalculated. Jake, standing 2 feet behind her, had heard every word. His face had gone the particular white of someone who has just understood something retroactively, something about the shape of the last 3 years, the private rooms, the chef, the scholarship, the girl who had been funding his quiet dignity without either of them quite naming it. I had not named it then. I was not naming it now. I simply smiled, picked my fork back up, and said I hoped they enjoyed the rest of the evening. Lucas appeared at my shoulder approximately 4 seconds later. I did not ask how he had gotten there that fast. The bullet comment said he had been watching from across the room the entire time, and it started moving when Emma approached. I did not look at him right away. I watched Emma and Jake leave the dessert table and move to a quiet corner where they stood very close together and talked in the low, urgent tones of people who have just discovered a problem they cannot immediately solve. The bullet comments narrated it lovingly. I ate my dessert. It was very good. The pastry chef had been hired by my mother and was worth every cent. Walking out of the gala 2 hours later, the autumn air sharp and cold against the warm light pouring from the lobby behind us, Lucas stopped on the steps and looked at me with the expression I had come to understand was his version of emotional transparency. Not a smile, not a frown, just a looking, steady, and direct, that said more than his words usually did. He said, "You planned all of that." I said, "I planned the audit. The rest was just arithmetic." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your grandmother would like me." I turned to look at him. I said, "She's been asking about you since I mentioned the gala." He went very still. His ears turned red. The bullet comments screamed for approximately 30 scrolling lines, and I did not disagree with a single word. The scholarship review concluded 4 weeks after the gala. 3 grants were reallocated to new recipients. Jake's was not among them. I had been careful about that, specific and deliberate, because what I had wanted was never to hurt him, but to no longer be invisible to the machinery of my own life. He graduated on his own merits, which were real, and went on to the university he had worked for, and Emma went with him, and the story continued exactly as it was always supposed to, with the leads getting their ending and the side character getting something better. I got the audit, I got the gala, I got the burgundy dress and the flat forward declaration and the slow lunches and the ear tips going red over sweet and sour pork ribs. I got to stop writing love letters to someone who never read them and start writing company memos that people actually answered. The bullet comments appeared less frequently after that. The story had found its shape. The last one I saw clearly floating gold texts on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Lucas was reading a contract across from me at the study table and occasionally asking me questions that he knew. I knew the answers to, said simply, side character didn't survive the story. She rewrote it. I folded the thought away like a letter, except this one I was going to keep.